Welcome. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Just wait just a minute here for everyone to log in. Hello. All right. So we'll keep I'm sure people will still filter in. And let me. I hope everyone is enjoying International Nature Journaling Week. Yeah, I see some of you with your videos on with head nods. You can give a thumbs up. You could go down to the bottom and hit a reaction if you're enjoying the themes that we've come up with. Yeah, well, Corina and I are both part of the International Nature Journaling team, and we're just so happy to have you all here. All right, so I think probably people are going to still be filtering in and they'll just hop in. Let's see. I'm just going to thank you all for being here for International Nature Journaling Week. We are excited to have the celebration of nature and nature journaling and using our senses to explore the world around us. And today we have an amazing topic of aroma, which is not something that maybe we think about putting in a nature journal because it's kind of hard to get that smell sense onto paper, but we're going to explore some ways with Corina. But before I turn it over to Corina, I just want to thank everyone who's been participating online and on social media or through our Padlet sharing page. We just have been enjoying seeing everyone's participation. And if you are able to make a donation to International Nature Journaling Week to help make this sustainable, to help with operating costs and all the volunteer hours that go into getting the website up and the beautiful blog pages and each day all of the emails that come out to you. So if you're able to, I will go and put the link to that donation page in the chat. And I'm going to turn it over to my friend Corina Brdar, who will introduce herself and get us started on the topic.
Sure. Thanks, Melinda. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. Hi, it's so nice to see you. I'm really excited to be here today, and I really appreciate everyone taking time today to join me or to watch the video afterwards, because it will be uploaded to the website. And so today's session will be shorter than some of the others, and it'll be interactive, but I'm hoping that for the people who watch the recording, it will still be just as fun if you had to miss it. So I'm going to share my screen. And Melinda, you'll let me know you see that well?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to share my thoughts on this sense with you. And there'll be times where I prompt you to use the chat, and sometimes Melinda will read some of those out for the benefit of the people who are watching the recording. And then I think we'll have time for questions at the end, because I only anticipate this taking about half an hour. I hope you have a notebook with you. If you don't have all your art supplies, that's fine. We're just going to do really simple stuff together today. So, now I forget how to advance. This is a new platform for me, Canva. It's beautiful, but it's new. So you can start, if you haven't already, just typing in the chat what country you're joining us from. This is an international event, which is really cool. And I can see just from the participants I see here that there's people from different parts of North America and from Europe, just from the people I recognize here. So that's great. And of course, Bethan, our beautiful leader who does so much of the work. I hope she's sleeping right now. You don't see her on the list, do you, Melinda? I'm sure she's sleeping. So while people just type into the chat what country they're from, I'd like to start by acknowledging where I am. And I'm on what the original inhabitants and stewards of this land called Turtle Island, which is also known as North America. And I live in what is now the province of Ontario, Canada, where the red arrow is. Our country, Canada, has a dark and shameful history of treatment of Indigenous peoples, and the impacts of colonization on those nations and on nature continue to this day. And so here we often open gatherings that relate to the land with an acknowledgement of whose land it is that we're fortunate to be enjoying. And for me, this also includes all our relations, all of the living beings. So depending on where you live, that might be a practice that you do as well. And it's a nice way to start towards reconciliation if your country happens to have that kind of history with its Indigenous peoples. So today, I'm going to take you on a little journey through the sense of smell. I'd like to start by getting to know each other a little bit. I'll tell you a bit about me. You can tell me a bit about you in the chat. And then I'm going to offer some of my reflections on the sense of smell and aroma and what it means in our nature journaling. Then I'm going to go through 3 cues that many of you will be very familiar with, and I'll offer kind of 2 ways of thinking about each of them in terms of aroma. And then finally, I have a bonus cue that we'll go through. And so who am I? So this is me, obviously. During the day, I was an ecologist for most of my career, and now I work for an environmental nonprofit organization. And so I think about nature from a science and policy viewpoint all day long and often at night too. And so for me, my nature journaling practice is my chance to connect more through my heart than to explore some of the scientific questions. And I know for some of you, you love enjoying that science aspect. And I think there's ways to do that with aroma. And today I'm going to focus more on the more personal, intimate ways to connect with that sense, but that doesn't limit looking into the science aspect as well. I just need a break from science when I'm nature journaling. That's why I do it. And I wanted to also let you know how I came to nature journaling, because I know in International Nature Journaling Week, we have people who are brand new to this practice, and we have people who've been doing it a really long time. And so it's kind of nice to hear, well, how did people find out about this? And so while I tell you my story quickly, feel free to share in the chat how it is that you managed to arrive here today. And those of you who listen to Bethan's podcast know that she often asks her guests that. And I find it such an interesting part of their story. And so for me, I've always been trying to do something like nature journaling. I didn't know there was a name or a practice or a community. And I was always super frustrated because my pictures looked not as nice as I would have liked them to. So I'd like do it and I'd be like, and I'd lose interest. And then in 2020, I heard about Wild Wonder, which many of you did as well. And I joined it and it was amazing, of course. And then Marley Pfeiffer gave a talk, and I don't even know what it was he said, but it took away that need to think I'm doing art, because I'm not. Like, it's in a little notebook that I show like my partner, and that's it. And something about the way he framed it, where it's just go do it while you do your coffee in the morning, just capture things on the page, write stuff, it doesn't matter. The way he said it has really spoken to me. And that's something beautiful about International Nature Journaling Week and Wild Wonder and other events like that is there's so many different people offering what they do in different ways. That's something will speak to everyone, I hope. And so, yeah, please feel free to share in the chat. We won't read them out right now, but or if you're watching the recording, reflect on your own, like, how did I get here? Why am I doing this? What has helped me along my way? It's a really nice way to, especially if you're like, oh, I wish my pictures looked nicer. It's a nice way to reflect back on, well, look where I came from. And maybe I wasn't even doing this 5 years ago.
Yeah, Corina, while you're giving folks just a couple minutes here to type in their response, I'll just kind of go through and see, let us know who is here. So if you're just joining us, type in what country you are joining us from. And so far in the chat, I see that we've got, I'm in California, and we've got folks from Virginia in the US, so all across the United States. We have Berlin, Germany, Northern Germany, France, Quebec, Ottawa, Canada, the Netherlands, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. So we have the Southern Hemisphere present here. London, UK, all over the United States, Germany, and from Seattle to North Carolina. So we've got a lot of folks here.
That's fantastic. Welcome and thank you, everyone. So I already alluded to this a bit, and hopefully all of you are receiving the newsletter and have explored the website and all the online resources. There are tons, and if you haven't found them yet, or you just arrived here and don't even know how you got here, feel free to ask a question in the chat and Melinda can direct you to where you need to go to find all the materials. But I'm really curious to know in the chat what prompts or cues or resources you've been inspired by so far. If you feel like sharing that, because I would like to share how I've been inspired by all of you so far. Since I agreed to do this presentation on Aroma, I've been thinking about the sense of smell like for a month every time I'm outside, and I had my whole presentation planned, and then I started seeing what everyone else was contributing, and it really inspired me. So I'm just going to mention a few things that I noticed this morning. So several people mentioned sweet peas and the importance of flowers like sweet peas and other special plants that they grow in their garden, and people shared beautiful memories and thoughts about that. Someone, I think they were in Germany, spoke about when their city, the lime trees are all in flower and how heavenly it is. And so in Canada, we call these linden trees. You might know them as linden or Tilia. There's cultivars in Canada, or Tilia americana is the native one. And yeah, the city I lived in had the same thing. It's incredible. So I really loved seeing that. Someone noted that smells change with weather and time, which was a brilliant insight, and I'll get to that later. And I also really liked how someone talked about they were smelling the cedar trees around them, and it reminded them of their childhood and packing things into cedar crates. And I thought that was really neat because often the memory goes the other way. And so this person was smelling the thing in nature to remind them of the childhood memory. And I really liked that. And so if you haven't done so already, if you're on the social media feeds, either on Instagram or Facebook, have a look at Bethan's post from today about she's doing a giveaway of a book, How to Smell a Tree. I think that's what it's called. You'll find that post because it's her podcast interview with the author, and she's asked people to comment to receive or to have a chance to receive a free copy of the book. I highly encourage you to read through all the comments. People have written such wonderful things. And so I don't know, Melinda, if people have put things in the chat that they have found inspirational, and if you'd like to share some.
Yeah, let's see. So one person said Jill said she found Cornell Lab's online class with Liz Clayton Fuller on nature journaling to be really helpful. Verena was saying in Germany, always wanted to draw, but was kind of frustrated and loved being in nature, but then was gifted the Laws Guide. And then it was set, everything fell into place. And she finally found a new name for what she wanted to do and found a community. Yeah, a couple of other people also found the Laws Guide as well. That was really helpful.
That's great. Thank you everyone for sharing. And I wanted to share one other thing that really touched me today that someone shared. And the person's name is Manuela, and I don't know if they're here or not. But they said it was just their comment on Bethan's post, and they said senses are the bridges to the world we live in. And I just thought that was so perfect. And Melinda, I think that's probably why our team chose this theme this year. So I'm glad one of our participants picked up on that. Okay, so let's start some of the exercises. Hopefully you've been doing this all along, breathing, but we're going to be a little bit more mindful about it right now. And so if you're comfortable, if you have your camera on, just take a moment and close your eyes. Close your mouth if you can breathe through your nose, and just breathe. Just land where you're sitting and let your body do its work and let the air flow in and out. As you do that, notice if you detect any aromas. And if you're in your house, you might not, because we all get acclimatized to the use of our house or the smell of our house. And that's okay. If you're outside, you might start to notice things. But as you do that, too, notice if you start to attach words to whatever you're detecting, and see if you can let those words go away, because we use words in our nature journal. Words are important for this practice, but sometimes it's nice to just start our session without all that, with just like landing and being in the place that we are and letting it all come in without our brain trying to do anything with it. Just like, it's here, I'm letting you come in. Good. Thank you for doing that. So as I mentioned, I like to approach my nature journal practice more as a mindfulness practice than necessarily a science one. And I also spent a long time as a yoga teacher for beginners. So it's kind of nice to bring these two things together. And I invite you to just do that practice every time you're outside and you pull out the nature journal. And I forget too, because it's like, oh, I saw this cool thing I want to draw. But especially if you use the practice of a sit spot, it's perfect. And it takes away from that kind of, sometimes I almost feel greedy when I'm nature journaling, I have a acquisitional mind frame, like, oh, I'm in this place, I want to capture this thing, I want to cram it into my book. And sometimes when I recognize I'm doing that, I'm like, no, like, that is not why you do this. You do this to connect with nature. So that is a nice practice to start with. So I'd like to share some thoughts on what aroma, or the sense of smell, is, and many people have already done so online. And these are some of the things that I have thought about, and then we'll do some exercises together after this. And so first of all, what I learned preparing today is that it's ancient, that I won't get into all the evolutionary history of it, but basically our sense of smell is what led or triggered some of the development of our large brains. So it's a very old sense. And, most beings and organisms have some form of chemical receptor that is like kind of the first way they navigate their world. They might not have ears or eyes or tongues or other things, but they will be able to detect chemicals. And really, that's what smell is. It's chemicals on vapor in your environment coming into your nose and interacting with your nerves. And so that's really cool. It's enigmatic. And I say that because it's a sense that we don't fully understand. Western science does not. I think other knowledge systems have their own ways of understanding it. They're very interesting. I don't know a lot about something like, say, Ayurveda, but I imagine just the little tiny bit I'm aware of, they have their own understandings of smell. So there's much to learn there. Smell is very evocative, as many people have already shared. The second you smell something, thoughts come up, and that's a really cool aspect of it. It's ephemeral, and it's both ephemeral in terms of our ability to use this sense. A lot of people don't have this. Some people lose it through illness, as we've all learned recently, and for those of you who are women, depending what age you are, you will have also noticed that it changes with cycles and with age, that sense. So it's when it can come and go, and you might not always realize that. You might not even clue into it. And someone today online talked about, imagine being in nature and there being no smell, and how sterile that would seem. And I thought that was a really interesting point. And then finally, it's arousing. When we smell something, we have a reaction to it. It can be neutral. When we did that breathing exercise, if you could smell things, you might have tried hard not to attach a label or words to it, but you would have had a reaction. You would have automatically thought, oh, I like that smell, I don't like that smell, or maybe been neutral. And it's something we kind of can't help. Like it triggers an opinion in us. So, and given all of that and the nature of it, it is such an intimate sense. It's not only because of all the things I just said, but also because it is, unlike some of our other senses where it's energy or waves touching our body and making our body respond, this is a molecule coming inside our body and then being carried, like actually interacting with our physical being, and then that carrying information through our body. And that is very intimate. So that makes it a really cool sense, in my opinion. So let's do one little exercise together. And when you see this, everyone's seeing a mushroom, I hope. Just start writing in your journal right away words that come to mind that are related to the sense of smell. And those of you that were at or have seen the day one video on color, we did this really fun exercise with Verena, and I can see Verena on my screen. That's like, hi, having a nice day. It looks beautiful. We did this really fun exercise where we were associating words with colors, and we had a really great discussion about the color rusty bike. And then someone in the audience, Kat, who I don't know, said, oh yeah, it's a good exercise to do with smell too. So while I've been talking, I hope you've been writing words in your journal related to this guy. And Melinda, I didn't tell people to share them in the chat, but are there any in the chat?
Oh, smell. No. Did you want us to type something in the chat?
Well, I did, but I didn't tell you guys that.
Okay.
So you might not have done it. But if people want to share some of their words that came up for this mushroom, please do. I'm curious to know what people came up with. And for those of you watching the video afterwards, I hope that you're writing things in your own journal. And while you wait, you can sketch this little mushroom too, if you want to practice your drawing. Do we
That
have
was
any tips there?
great, Karina. I just wanted to, go back to what you were saying about the intimacy of aroma. It's something that I hadn't really considered. So appreciate you bringing that to our attention about the molecules are actually entering and interacting with us, which is different from our vision or hearing or touch. So this is really just pretty cool. This really interesting way that we're sensing the world. So I have a few words to describe this mushroom or mushrooms in general. We get musky, earthy, sweet, moldy musk, woody, earthy, comfy. So I encourage everyone to just keep, every time you think of words that describe smells, put them in your journal or type them in the chat. I find that increasing our vocabulary around aroma is going to be beneficial for everybody.
Yeah, I totally agree, Melinda. And I think Bethan mentioned this in her post from her explorations in her own journal, that she found it a bit challenging to come up with the words. So as we practice them, then we can use them more.
Yep.
So I have this book, and some of you might know it. I don't know if you can see. It's called A Natural History of the Senses. And it was a very popular book in its time. It's by Diane Ackerman, and she is also a biologist. It's a really cool book. She goes through each of the senses and has lots of interesting essays on them. So if you're interested in the book, I always see it in used bookstores because everyone had it when it first came out. And it's a bit dated now, so I think some of the science in it is probably has been updated since she wrote it. But in it, she says that all smells fall into a few basic categories, almost like primary colors, which I thought was neat. And she lists them, and I think these have probably changed by now, but she said minty, floral, musky, resinous, foul, acrid, and ethereal. And I love that. I'm like, oh, ethereal. And she gave the example of pears for ethereal, but when I was reading that, my this magnolia tree in my yard was flowering, and I can't remember what this variety is called, but it has the most delicate fragrance that to me embodies the concept of ethereal. It's not floral. It's so much more delicate and magical than that. So we won't share this in the chat, but maybe in your own journal or in your mind, just think about, oh, ethereal, like what smell is that? And when have I experienced that? I thought that was a really neat, something else that might be is like champagne or mead. To me, that would be that smell. So it's just a little challenge for you to do on your own. So now I'm going to go into the cues that many of you will already know. I wonder, it reminds me of. They were actually the cues for International Nature Journaling Week a few years ago. So if you're not already familiar with these prompts, go to the website, and if you dig through the website and look at previous years and past programs, if you dig in, you'll find a ton of amazing resources. And of course, many nature journal teachers use these cues, but I want to go through them with the sense of smell. And so the first one is, what do you notice? And it's interesting because it's not because smell, we don't always pay attention to it. Maybe we don't even notice smells. And so my example here of what you notice intentionally, it's go out in nature and be intentional to see what you can notice about smells. And so I was camping, and I love these little white flowers. They're called trailing arbutus. They're a native plant in northern Canada. And I saw them and I thought, well, these must smell. So I was actually portaging on it. I was on a canoe trip, so I had like 50 pounds on my back, but I'm like, no, I gotta smell what these smell like and get down on the ground. And yeah, they smelled lovely. They were like jasmine, so it was totally worth it. And you'll notice I just said, oh, they were like jasmine. They reminded me of jasmine. And so that is one of those cues that we all use. And with those cues I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, you can write them in your book and write answers beside each of them, or you can think of them more holistically. It's just a way to inform your approach and give you ways of looking at the world and capturing it. And I can see we're going to be more than half an hour. We might take the whole hour. It's fine. Okay, so there's that way of noticing smell, but there's also, what do you notice unintentionally? And so here I was weeding a particularly messy corner of my garden, which is actually the whole garden. And I was so focused on the weeds that I wasn't even paying attention to the flowers. I was like, where's weeds, where's weeds? And then like the smell hit me of, first of all, lavender. This is lavender on the left, and then this is centaurea on the right, which is also quite a fragrant flower. And so I thought, oh, how am I going to nature journal that? This is what I did. So unintentionally, I was doing something in nature and the aroma came to me and said, notice me. So that's the unintentional noticing, letting yourself be open to, oh, this nature is sending me information. I will notice it. And so this is how I tried to capture it. This is the centaurea, this line, messy line drawing on the right, bottom right corner. And then the purple cloud and plume above it is kind of how I pictured the scent happening around it. And that is how that plant releases its scent. It's in clouds around it. And then next to it is this lavender, the little short, little sticky plant. And it's different, right? Well, it was for me in my climate. It was because I had my face down the plants, like the smell was strong, but it was close around it. So that's one fun way to try to capture smell, aroma in your journal. And so I was doing this and I'm mixing up this amazing purple to capture the centaurea. And I was so into it that I like took my paintbrush and sniffed it to see if I got it right. And then it didn't smell like it, but I like the color. Okay, so our next cue, what do you wonder? If you have a journal with you, we'll do a little exercise together. I'm going to play a really short video clip and it's visual, so you won't be able to smell it, but I'd like you to just play along with me and write some notes in your journal about what you wonder about what's happening in terms of smell. And you can also sketch quickly what it's a video of as well. There's not a lot of movement. That's a video. I also have stills of this, so don't panic if you didn't get a chance to write it things down or sketch like you wanted to. So there's two ways to approach this question. The first is, what do you wonder about the being who's producing the fragrance? There's a lot of different questions you can ask about that. So go ahead and pop them in your journal. And then you can also wonder about the being who is detecting the fragrance. And that goes for when you're out in nature, you have a fragrance. And what do the beings around you detect? And maybe while you write down your thoughts on that, I'll just tell you a quick story. So on that canoe trip, it was super windy and we were in a favorable condition where the wind was blowing from in front of us down the river, like blowing our scent away as we traveled down the river. And so the animals couldn't smell us approach. And we approached a little mink really close. We were so close to him that I could see his little nose trying to sniff us. But he couldn't because it was very strong wind. So I think he was confused because it was also a really remote area. So we were probably the first humans he'd ever seen. So it was kind of neat, like just seeing him like, oh, you're trying to smell us. Yeah, of course. So it's kind of fun. And so here's some of the questions I came up with, and here's the page I did sitting there. And if you like, feel free to pop in the chat some of the questions that you came up with, and Melinda can read them. But for me, there was beautiful dappled sunlight. So well, first I assumed, oh, well, the flowers in the sun are warmer, so they're releasing more scent. But then I watched, and I'm like, well, that's not where all the pollinators are, so maybe that's not true. And then I'm like, well, are the bees and flies even attracted to the fragrance, or are they attracted to something else? And then I went and I smelled the flowers. I'm like, well, I don't even smell anything. So do they have a fragrance that insects can detect? And then I'm like, well, why did I assume that? And I realized, oh, I assumed it because well, they're white. And I once took a pollination biology course where I learned that a lot of white flowers are fragrant. And I can't remember all the reasons why now because it was 25 years ago, but it was very interesting at the time and I used to know it. So Melinda, have people shared any questions in the chat?
They might still be typing or maybe writing in the journal, but I've got a few here.
Sure.
So about the beans producing fragrance, who are they attracting with the fragrance? Which pollinators? And how do the pollinators smell them? And do pollinators smell things that we can't detect?
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah, and the more you sit and ask questions, the more come up. So I'm glad you guys gave that a try. Okay, our last cue that you'll all be familiar with is what it reminds me of. What are you reminded of? And people have been sharing about this all day. I already mentioned some of the things people shared, so thank you. But you can look at this again 2 ways, as in what does, I'm smelling this thing, I'm smelling this centaurea flower or whatever. What does it smell like? So I mentioned the arbutus smelled to me like jasmine. To me, this flower, I love the fragrance of it. It smells like, and some of you are going to think this is gross, it smells like Cool Whip. Do you know what that is? Like it's crap. It's like, I don't know what the heck it's made of. It's fake whipped cream. We have it in North America. I don't know if other people have it. It comes in a big tub. I think it's made out of petroleum. I don't know what it is, but it smells so good. It smells really light and fruity, almost like strawberry. So that's what this smells like to me. And I like, it leaves a greasy flavor taste in your mouth, but the smell. So if other people have this flower where they are, I think it's probably native to Europe. It's a tiny bit invasive. Go out and smell it first of all, and then write down for you what it smells like for you.
Corina, can you say what kind of flower that was again? The
Well,
cool flower?
yeah, I don't know its common name.
Okay.
It's a centaurea, so Centauria. That's a genus name. That's the thistle family. But that's what I've heard it be referred to. Maybe it's bachelor's buttons. I'm not sure.
It looks like it's in the same family.
Yeah, it's got the globe, like it's the same as our artichoke family. Yeah. So this one, so the other way, of course, is what memories does the scent trigger for you? And so this plant, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, I think everyone in the Northern Hemisphere will have this. It's common lilac, Syringa vulgaris. I don't know what other names there are for it. It has a very strong smell. And I think because it's so common, it will trigger memories for most people. And so if you know this plant and you have it, you can probably picture the smell right away. Take a moment to just write down a single memory that you have of the smell of this plant. And for people in the Southern Hemisphere who might not have this plant, I'm sorry that you won't be able to participate in this. Or maybe you will. It's a pretty invasive plant. It's probably all over the globe. And then if you have a memory of this plant and the that its scent triggers, please feel free to share it in the chat. And if not, we can move on to this one. This is my patio, and I'll forget it's there because it's kind of tucked away, and I forget that it's there. And then I'll walk by, and there's just this cloud that and it floats around my yard, like depending on the wind direction, depending on all kinds of factors. And it'll be like, oh, wow, yeah, that's flowering again. And then I know to go look for it hiding in the hedgerow. Melinda, has anyone shared a memory about
Yeah,
that?
I'm
Yeah.
gonna go back here. So my memory of lilac is my sisters and I collecting some as a gift for our mom. Jill says biking in spring with my college roommate. Jen says riding my big wheel at my grandparents. And I remember growing up in my kind of mid-childhood home and just loving like standing by the bush and taking deep breaths of it. And I also had a flower shop, so I would buy branches of lilac to sell in the shop, and just they were one of my favorite fragrances. Here we go. Ray Bonto says walking through the park with my mom. Incan says my mom always grabs lilac and put it in every pot in the house. I wanted to, Corina, just share something that came up as I was thinking about how lilac makes me take really deep breaths, multiple deep, long breaths. And I wonder if having fragrant gardens, fragrant plants, visiting fragrant places helps us with receiving more oxygen, like taking those slow, deep breaths. That might also help with slowing down the stress response. So maybe even a bouquet of smelly like beautiful smelling flowers as a gift to ourselves. This is something that, is sometimes it's hard to do. I try to make an effort of, like, when I see beautiful flowers, is try to buy something for me as a gift to nourish me. But I just kind of made that connection right now. It's like, that breath work and smell work might go hand in hand.
Oh, and I didn't even plan you saying that, and I'm so glad you did, because it totally reminded me of something so important I wanted to share with everyone that I learned while I was preparing for this. Yeah, and so for people that have a meditation or yoga practice, you may have already learned that that slow breathing through your nose, it does trigger to speak to what Melinda just said, it actually triggers the part of our nervous system. It's called the parasympathetic response system. It's the part of our nervous system that lets us settle and be calm. So the opposite of the fight, flight, or freeze. And so, yes, that is another reason why it's so nice to, when we're nature drilling, just, yes, let's stop, breathe deeply, smell, and it is an actual physical, it is a science thing that it affects your whole nervous system. And furthermore, I found a podcast from a prof in the US, and it was like 2 hours long about smell. And he's talked about the most recent science about smell and how by breathing deeply and using that sense, and I won't remember the science of it, but it makes your brain work better. And I can't remember all the details, but it was fascinating. And he also talked about how people use smelling salts to make themselves more alert. And I didn't know that was a thing. And then we just had hockey playoffs. I'm not a hockey fan, but my dad wanted to watch it. And all the hockey players it's incredibly difficult physical sport. Their coaches were giving them smelling salts when they were sitting on the bench. It's like, oh, like that is a thing. That's a thing. And that gets back to how intimate this sense is. It's physiological reactions that it causes. And thank you everyone for sharing your memories. Yeah, it's such lilac is such a nostalgic childhood type smell, I find, for so many people. So our last cue that we'll go through together is, what do you feel? So I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, it makes me feel. And I first heard this cue added by Paula Peters, who's an Australian nature journaler, and I think her website's called Paper Bark Writer. Bethan's interviewed her on the podcast, and I love this particular cue because that's my approach. And everything we're doing today, a lot of it can be writing words in our journals, and that's fine. It's nice to add words to our journals. It takes the pressure off the drawing. So again, there's two ways you can think about this, and I'll start with the more sciencey way, is what you feel physically. And maybe, I know some of you are outside right now. For those of you who are, or if you're outside while you're watching the recording, pay attention to what is the temperature. Do you have sunlight on you or not? What is the relative humidity? So that is how much moisture is the air holding. And there's instruments you can buy that measure that, but you can feel it too. Another way to kind of get a sense of relative humidity is to find some leaves on the ground and crinkle them. I used to work on prescribed fires for restoration, and that's what the fire people do. They grab a handful of leaves, crinkle them, like, yep, it's good, let's light it up. Because the leaves hold the moisture or not. And of course, when the leaves are not holding moisture, then it's good for fire, as I'm sure many people know. And then I already talked about the wind direction, but also wind speed. All these things are really important for how and when and where you may or may not be able to detect aroma. And these are also all things that are sometimes called metadata. So that's information about what's happening during your nature journaling session that you can write into your nature journal. So if you're outside right now and you've been paying attention to these things, you can write notes down right now for your page for this day, what that information is. And you might not know like the scientific way to measure relative humidity or wind speed, but you can make your own notes on that. And I'm purposely not going to show you an example of metadata in nature journals because you can do it however you want. And for me, when I start seeing too many ideas about how to do things, it shuts me down. And I'm a very rules following person. So I start copying other people, and I don't like doing that. So I'm going to let you record this in whatever way you want. So that's, and someone noted that online too, that all these factors affect our sense of smell and what aromas we detect. But then finally, and maybe most importantly, is what you feel emotionally from the smell. And we already got at that a little bit today, just some of the memories people shared about lilacs. Those were emotions that were triggered. And so Joe, who's goes by Art in Discovery on Instagram. I don't know you, Joe, but I'm so glad you said I could quote you because you shared this online this week about your experience during day one, about being in the Aldo Leopold Reserve in Wisconsin. And look at this beautiful quote that Joe had. What overcame me and brought tears to my eyes was the aroma of the pine, the smell that bears the deepest resonance in the natural world. Like that, like I got like little chills when I read that. And Joe's been sharing some other wonderful things since then. So please check out her Instagram account if you haven't already. But that is the special extra level of magic that this sense can bring to our nature journals. That transforms them from being just, an art sketchbook to something so much more personal. So if you haven't already done that this week for this cue of aroma, I hope you'll give that a try. And maybe that approach isn't for you, but if you try it in the future, you might realize that it's a nice thing to include. And so, yeah, I went way over half an hour. I told you, Melinda, I'm like, oh, sometimes I go longer than I think I will. But I appreciate people sharing too. So My last suggestion is come back to what we did at the beginning and just be in nature and use all your senses, but especially the sense of smell kind of brings us back to the fact that we're animals. We are animals. And this is a sense that we have let atrophy because our lifestyles have allowed us to, but it's still there and it can be developed. And it connects us to that, the nature part of us. Just, I don't know another way to put it. We're animals, we're part of nature. And if you watched this morning's video, Sonia and her dog Nico, I don't know if you've seen it yet. It's so delightful. And she lets her dog Nico, which is an animal that relies on its sense of smell, she follows her and lets her provide her, Sonia herself, with inspiration. And so I hope you'll be able to do that as well yourself as you explore this sense. And I really appreciate you all being here. I took longer than I said, and that's okay if people dropped off. But I'm still here if people have questions or want to have a discussion, or otherwise we can close. Melinda, if there's anything there we need to cover, we can do that.
Okay. I have put in a link to today's Aroma video. So if you haven't seen it now, you can go over to the chat, click that, and it'll open in your browser. It's just a really fun way to think about, how we can expand our sense of smell through the beings that we keep as companion animals. Let me see. I'm going to see if there's any questions in the chat or any other comments.
And maybe while you do that, Melinda, I totally forgot that I wanted to mention, I want to give a little shout out to Melinda because she puts out a beautiful newsletter through her business of Spark in Nature. And it's very much about using a mindfulness approach to your nature journaling. Especially for people who are new to the practice, you might think your drawing isn't good enough. And that's just not true. If you can make a mark on the page, great. If you're in nature doing this, great. And I especially find Melinda's newsletters have really nice reminders of just letting go of that need to create something pretty and to connect with all the things I've been trying to share today. So that I meant to say that earlier. Thanks, Melinda.
I've actually put the link in the chat. So even
you.
if you're not in my newsletter, there's a link to the most recent one I sent out. And it links to a blog. Actually, I wrote an article about being mindful, like having your mind full of the moment in nature. So that would be with just some tips on how to do that in nature. Let's see, I have a couple of comments here. So Marie France said, in a collection of lilacs, running from one lilac to another to smell all of them and to find my preference. I did it until I got dizzy. And Sarah is thanking you. This is so wonderful. I'm training as a florist and as well, and can pass on the power of flowers in the home to clients, especially if they don't have access to outdoor spaces. And I wanted to also say, Corina, your research that you did and the sharing was so beautiful today, and really like getting me think a little bit more about smells. And it triggered this memory of places that I've been that have sensory gardens where they've planted plants in trees and shrubs specifically for sensory, like mostly smell and touch. But and I wonder if if we can seek out something like that or create our own sensory garden, right? Creating going to the nursery and inviting that sense of smell and that sense of touch, and welcoming new plants home to our gardens if we have that garden space. And if we don't have a garden, maybe being out on our walks and just leaning in. One thing I like to do is a smell walk. Sometimes when I walk my dog, I'm not, depending on the day, I'm not always able to journal. And so sometimes I'll just go in a smell walk and I'll just smell everything as I'm walking by, as she is smelling. And and I'm surprised, sometimes flowers don't have a smell at all to me, or they have this wonderful aroma, and it just gets the curiosity juices going of like, gosh, why is this so fragrant? And I wonder why this is, so colorful, or why this doesn't have a fragrance, and why it's shaped like that. So you can be curious and be in wonder and awe of nature, even if you don't have your journal handy, and you can always put those in your journal later. So thank you
Love
for
that idea.
having us practice thinking about smell and experimenting with different ways to describe smell. And, just like any other skill, like drawing and seeing, the sense of smell and writing about smell is a skill that can develop over time with practice. So I invite you all to, do a little bit more and share. I wanted to share a couple of things. One is this year I put it into the chat. This year we have an additional way to share nature journal pages for those people who are not on social media. You can go to a Padlet page. It's a free web-based platform, and you can go, and we have columns for each day. So you can go and scan and see examples of people from around the world sharing their nature journaling experience through the senses. And you can also add your own. So I invite you to go and check that out. And if you enjoyed this session or the week, what's going on, let's see, I'm going to put this in here. If you are able to make a donation to help support International Nature Journaling Week, there's a lot of hours and meetings and behind the scenes work and troubleshooting and preparation and invitation and speaking and talking to people and posting and social media and all of that happens and behind the scenes to bring the whole world together to share our love of nature and nature journaling. So if you feel like you'd love to reciprocate what you've received or are receiving in the form of a donation, your gift would be greatly accepted and appreciated. And so before we log off, I'd love to thank Corina for sharing with us about Aroma, and I hope that everyone has a beautiful rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy. Bye.
Great. Thank you, Corina. This has been amazing.
Oh, thank you for moderating so perfectly.